Fundraising Radio, and today's a guest speaker. We have Sungjoon Cho, General Partner at D20 Capital. And this episode, we'll talk about cross-border investing. When can a US-based company expect to go global, and how US-based companies can leverage partnerships with cross-border investors in the US. So, Sun, let's kick off by you giving us some background on yourself and on D20 Capital.
Sure, yeah. So I'll start with D20. So D20 is a new venture fund based here in the Bay Area. It's solely backed by Doosan, which is a large Korean conglomerate with broad operations in the industrial sectors. We set up shop last year and started investing this year. We led a Series A in a Bay Area construction tech startup and have invested in a few other unannounced rounds ranging from C to Series B. As for my background, I'm an engineer by training, studied electrical engineering, and then was a product manager at Samsung. So we built processors for the first iPhones and Samsung's Galaxy smartphones back in the day when there was like serious debates on whether people would be watching video on their smartphones. That was a real thing. The execs were like, why would we watch video when you could watch it on your laptop or your
TV? Nice days.
How times have changed. And so I spent a few years there and then worked a couple of years in the Samsung family office. And then I shifted gears a little bit, came back to the US, went to business school at Columbia in New York. I did a couple of years of consulting at McKinsey. And then I moved over to the Bay Area in 2015 to join venture. So Formation 8 was the first fund that I joined, and then AmAsia, and now D20. So it's kind of been a mix of large and small institutional funds, and now also a corporate-backed fund. So it's kind of, I've run kind of a gamut on different kinds of venture funds.
That's real cool. Really nice background. I know, just thinking that there were times when people were not sure if people will watch video on their phones. It's insane for me. I'm too young for that stuff. But let's talk more about D20. So you mentioned that you've invested in one construction tech and a couple unannounced rounds. Generally, what do you invest in? Are there any specific fields that you are looking for, or some specific rounds that you usually invest in? So seed plus, or is it pre-seed as well?
Yeah, so in terms of sectors, we're a generalist firm, so there's no like sector mandate. But one sector that we have gone deep in is in the industrials sectors that are adjacent to what our parent company operates in, so like construction and manufacturing. We are very bullish on many other sectors in kind of tech world, and we as probably with all other investors in the industry, we've been spending a lot of time and energy thinking through what are the implications of COVID on other sectors, and kind of spending time in sectors like education and fintech. In terms of stage, we're really flexible actually, but then I'd say kind of the sweet spot is around the Series A when there's some metrics. And then we've committed to the seed deal as well as a Series B deal, so that's probably kind of the range right there.
Got it. All right, nice. So let's talk about deal sourcing. That's the question that I generally ask all my investor speakers. So you're not an exception. How do you source your deals? Where do you find those investments that you make finally?
Yeah, so for sourcing, it's interesting, right? Because I've been at kind of like a brand name, which actually that firm no longer exists, but and I've also been at like a small firm and now like a brand new firm. So it really depends on what kind of firm you're at, right? So, kind of the brand name firms, I'd say the vast majority of deals are just kind of flow in, so it's inbound. For newer firms like us, we have to be much more proactive, right? So our sourcing there's kind of, I'd say like three vectors. So one is inbound. There's still deals that are introduced to us from other entrepreneurs in the industry that we know or other VCs. So that's one. The second one is syndicating with other VCs. So talking to friends in the industry, just asking what they're working on, or if we have a thesis, finding investors that have invested a lot in a certain space and saying, hey, we're really excited about this space. What companies have you seen that are exciting or fundraising right now or coming up? And then the third one, my previous firm did this a lot, but is outbound sourcing, right? So you dive deep on a certain sector, kind of create a market map, figure out which companies are interesting and whether you could kind of guess like roughly when they'll be fundraising, and then you reach out and kind of start the relationship. And when they are fundraising, because you've spent a lot of time thinking about that sector, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes they'll reach out and say, hey, we did kick off for fundraising. So it's kind of three vectors.
Nice. I really, so sometimes, let's talk about the third one a little bit in depth. So that's another question that I personally get a lot. So like founders ask me, how do I get my company out there so that, investors who do some outbound as well will notice my company specifically. So what are the sources that you find those companies that you actually reach out to? Are those some articles on Crunchbase? Is it Crunchbase itself based on some metrics, or where do you find those companies that you reach out to?
Yeah, so I think there's multiple ways, right? So one is, let's just take construction tech, for example. So there's several kind of industry conferences or industry like research organizations. So in construction, there's something called Built Worlds, and a lot of folks from the industry, as well as investors, as well as startups, are involved. And so like those kinds of forums are great ways to get your name out there. And then also, I think some level of PR. And this is something that I've thought a lot about over the years. How important is PR? And I think you obviously don't want to spend too much time and frankly too much money on it. But I think to a certain extent, when there's an opportunity to really kind of showcase something that you've built or like a major customer relationship that you've signed, and sometimes customers are really willing to step up the bat on that as well because they want to show that they're kind of on the cutting edge. Um, so I think it's just really spending a lot of, not a lot, but like spending a good amount of energy on figuring out how to get your name out there so that when somebody is Googling for, um, construction payments, for example, your name pops up. Or when I'm speaking to other industry experts, they say, "Oh, there's company A, B, and C that are playing in the sector, and we've seen some great things."
Nice. Yeah, that's great advice. I'm personally still, I've spoken to multiple investors and founders, and no one really gave me a good answer on how to do PR. So hopefully one day I'll have an episode where a person will be able to say A, B, and C in PR will give you XYZ in funding, but didn't happen yet. So let's go back into your earlier description of D20. You said that it's fully funded by a conglomerates. And my question is it basically corporate venture capital, or is it a family office, or is it like a actual venture capital?
Yeah, so I'd say it probably is closest to just a corporate. I mean, it is a corporate venture arm, right? So we are solely backed by a corporate, which makes us a corporate venture arm. I guess the way we're a little bit different is that we're structured as an institutional VC in the sense that we have an independent fund. The decision is made independently, and there's no strategic angle, right? So we don't have to go back to our corporate backers and say, hey, we found this company, do you approve? And we also don't have to say like, this company operates in construction, so we're only looking for construction tech companies, right? So we're very independent, much like the other institutional VC funds I've been at. Just the difference is that we have one backer, which is a large company.
That's really cool that you're like combining both good stuff from both worlds. So nice work there. My next question would be about differences between CVC and actual institutional investors in terms of the value proposition that those two have. So, can you name the major value proposition that, let's say, D20 specifically has versus some other venture capitals that you see, or maybe even family offices?
Sure. So in terms of value proposition, I think with CVCs, it's quite clear, right? So there's access to the parent company, hopefully customer and partnership opportunities. But the downsides are certainly there too, right? So sometimes some CVCs, it's not as common anymore, but will ask for like very strategic terms like don't work with our competitors, etc. And another potential downside is this is definitely not always the case, but is some signaling risk, right? So if you have a CVC leading around or that's priced around, sometimes follow-on investors might say or might think that that investor was not that sensitive on price, so did not optimize for price. So it's kind of pros and cons, right? For institutional investors, I think it's less clear of what the value proposition is. So I think it really comes. I mean, you hear like everybody says their value add, and everybody will have some level of some angle. But I think it really comes down to like the specific investor, right? So um, you just have to do diligence on was this investor really helpful? Were they really vested? In terms of their time and energy? Were they, pleasant to work with, right? Because if you partner with an investor, you're kind of partnering with that person for 10 years, right?
Right.
For brand name firms, I think there's, certainly positive signaling, right? So whether it's hiring or whether it's for follow-on rounds or syndicating rounds, if Sequoia invested, then everybody's like, how can I get considered, right?
Right.
So um, brand name firms will certainly have that.
Right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if you can get Sequoia investment, even if you don't need that investment, I would personally get that for sure. Like, no questions asked. But it's always up to you. So figure it out how to get that touch with Sequoia. But let's talk about who should go out and actually specifically target to. I mean, specifically target CVCs versus venture capital. So, who should actually reach out to corporate venture capitals versus venture capitals themselves?
Yeah, sure. So I think I think every fundraise it should kind of be structured as a well-organized process, almost like an enterprise sales process. You should have both institutional and corporate VC to begin with, right? So, and on kind of the CVC front, try to figure out which CVCs would be the best fit, not only from like the parent level, or actually more from like the CVC level, right? So there might be a CVC of a large corporation that at a high level is such a great fit to your business, but does that CVC actually have close ties with the parent, and will they actually be able to help? And so I think you kind of have to do that research. Have a broader list of both institutional and CVC. And then if you do have the luxury to prioritize allocations, and you can do that down the road. So I mean, kind of a more direct way to answer your question is like I don't think there's really a case where you say I'm only going to raise capital from quote unquote strategics, or only going to raise from institutional. I think you have to start the process with kind of the broader spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
and then prioritize when you can.
Right, absolutely. That's great advice. And you just narrow down your target as long. I mean, down the way once you see who's interested and who's not that interested. But let's talk about our main topic for this episode, which is cross-border investing. So, so D12 is connected to Asian markets, right?
Yeah, so our backer, corporate backer, is a Korean company with most operations in Asia. It's a
Mm-hmm.
global company, but stronger in Asia. So that's you could put it that way for sure.
So, question is, does it make sense for a US based company? Let's say they want to probably they don't even need to raise more money, but they want to go, let's say, to Asian markets. Doesn't make sense for them to go out and reach out to those cross-border investing, working with specifically with Asian markets.
So in the case where the company has no interest in going to Asia at some point.
No, there is specifically there is like, let's say my company is very much interested in going to Asia, like as soon as possible, but we don't might not even need capital as much, but I know that there is, let's say I know that you are well connected to Asian markets. Should I go out and try to get some sort of
I see. No, I don't think so. I don't think you need to elaborately go out and fundraise just to develop those relationships. And I mean, if you don't need the capital right now, then I think you can develop the relationships without raising capital from those investors, right? So we're more than happy to develop relationships with entrepreneurs and actually prefer it, right? So that potentially, like without needing to inject capital at this time, we can kind of use this process of partnering as part of our diligence, right? If you know whether it's our corporate backer or it's other industrials companies or other just broader companies that we know um, start working with the startup and really like them, then it's much easier to get conviction to invest down the road. And so I definitely don't think that you need a fundraise just for that reason. But obviously, if you need that extra capital to go to a new market, then those kinds of investors can be higher on that priority list.
Right, right. Yeah, I just realized like how not good my question sounded. So sorry for that one. But the let me try to rephrase that question, and I want to put it in the way that basically, if a US based company wants to expand to Asian markets, what's the best way to do that? Is it through angel investors here who are both working in the US and in Asia? Is it through corporate venture capital? Is it through venture capitals? What's basically the best way to expand to Asian markets, specifically from the United States?
Well, I mean, to kind of put it another way, I don't think an early stage startup should be saying we want to go to Asia unless there's some specific pull, right? So if you're a kind of deep tech company, then that where you work very closely with large companies on like a technology partnership, then you probably want to go to Asia because the Samsung has expressed interest in your semiconductor IP or something like that, right? And that's when you want to go. If you're, let's say, a consumer company or a SaaS company, you probably want to think about Asia if there's some organic pull, right? So if you're finding you don't have a presence out there, you haven't even localized to the language, but there's consumers from Asia that are signing up, right? Then that's probably the best catalyst. As an example, right? So in one of my previous funds, we invested in an online learning platform. They didn't even have a local payments system set up. They didn't have localized languages, but they still had a bunch of people signing up from Asian countries, right? And so that's when, from that company's perspective, you kind of prioritize your resources and think, okay, do we go international now and really set up an office there and localize? And if so, which markets? So to directly answer the question, I think without that kind of pool, just to kind of blindly say let's go to Asia, I think is pretty risky for an early stage startup. And so when you do have that pool, then there's a broader array of people that you can lean on, whether they're resellers or whether they're strategic partners in Asia or any other markets. So you don't necessarily need the investors. But that, if you do have an investor that does have expertise in that market or in international markets, they can help you think through which markets to prioritize and the timing.
Right, right. So my next question was, at which stage should founders start, thinking of going globally or going specifically to Asia? But I think you kind of answered that. So my next question would be, how should they prepare for that? So let's say I'm somewhat early stage startup. I start getting some, customers from Asia. I know that I should go there someday. How should I start preparing for that if I'm not ready to go there now, but I know that in a year I'll be in Asia. I mean, my company will be in Asia.
Yeah, and so kind of referencing that online learning company, I think you focus on your home market or your major market. If the product is great, if it's a two-sided market, if you have the supply, then um, then organically you'll get interest internationally, right? So I don't think it's necessarily, especially for early stage startups, really kind of proactively preparing. It's more really kind of perfect the product, make your home market customers happy, and then the rest will follow. So there's because it's just such a huge endeavor to try to prepare in advance for to go into Korea, for example, right? Like there's different payment systems. There you have to localize the language. There's many different nuances, and so yeah, I wouldn't really recommend preparing too far in advance, and I kind of let your customers dictate where you want to focus on next.
Right, right. That's good advice. I think don't spread yourself too thin. That killed multiple companies. So be careful with that. My next question will be about fundraising now. So during the coronavirus, you mentioned that you spent quite a while thinking about how your investment thesis changed. And what's your advice to early stage founders now trying to raise money?
Yeah. So there's a lot of talk about VC activity being high right now, but I think there's a bifurcation of kind of like Silicon Valley insiders or startup world insiders being able to raise versus founders without as strong of a network or entrepreneurial track record. They're finding it tougher, right? Because it's just hard to network. It's hard to just kind of plop yourself down in San Francisco and try to meet as many folks as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I think uh, just overall, right? So it's not. I think it's still a tough environment to raise capital. So I think from that sense, it's important, kind of as I mentioned before, to get organized and create an enterprise sales type process in doing investor outreach. I think it's important not to optimize on valuation and kind of let the market dictate the price. Um, and then I think like it's important not to take things personally, right? So like an anecdotal experience, right? On the other side of the table, I've pitched probably hundreds of limited partners to invest in my previous funds, right? And many times, to be honest, I took it personally when I was turned down. But now, so D20 has invested in a couple of funds. So being on the other side of the table, I quickly realized that LPs see tons and tons of different funds and invest in a couple of
Mm-hmm.
new ones a year. So then if you stack rank them, it's hard to make a case that the funds that I was a part of in the past were the absolute best, right? So likewise, VCs meet probably over 1,000 companies a year, right?
Yeah.
And so you as a startup founder and your business will be the right fit for someone, but not for all, and maybe not for many, right? So I think it's important to not take it personally, kind of take any feedback that you get. Sometimes the feedback will be very helpful, and sometimes kind of be BS. But take that, and you know, if you've developed a relationship with the VCs, even if they pass, try to ask for other intros. If somebody says, oh, it's too early, then maybe ask like, oh, do you know any kind of earlier stage investors that this might be a fit for? And it's you probably won't always get like a very good you know, meaningful intros, but you might get some, and those are kind of going back to that enterprise sales process. That those intros are kind of fill the top of the funnel again. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
kind of the process that you need to go down.
Right, absolutely, and that's the advice in terms of asking for more intros is great. You never know who you're gonna run into. Sometimes you get completely useless people, but sometimes you just get golden nuggets out of nowhere. It happened to me multiple times, and I'm like, wait, what? How did this even happen? And the answer is I just kept asking for that. So let's move on to the last question of today's episode, which is a call to action. What's the one thing that you want the listener to do as soon as the episode is over?
Yeah, so I guess this is fundraising radio, assuming that the listener is fundraising or considering fundraising in the in the near term. I think I know this is kind of a broken record at this point, but just getting organized, treating it as a very organized sales process. Use a CRM tool if you have one, or a very organized spreadsheet can work as well. And then And then, try to fill the top of that funnel. So with investor outreach, warm intros are always recommended, but also, completely recognize that not everybody has those connections to make those warm intros, right? So I think, don't be afraid to cold email. And once again, don't take it personally if the investors don't respond, but like it's worth a shot. But just make sure that those cold emails are a thoughtful, kind of personalized message. A lot of times, like I just get uh, what's very obviously kind of a mail merge or just random ads on LinkedIn, and so that's not really creating a high chance for you. So I think just being thoughtful and personalizing the message and cold emails, we try to at least respond to all of those.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you write a good, high quality, personalized email, the chances are really high that the person at least will say like, "I'm sorry, it's not a good time for us right now." So yeah, definitely do that. Put time into that, and as you said, don't take it personally. Stuff happens all the time. So we'll wrap it up here. My personal recommendation is go to the description of this episode. First of all, we have started our YouTube channel, so now Fundraising Radio is not audio only, but video as well. And I'll leave a link to D20, of course, so that you can take a look at the website. And if you think that you're a good fit, reach out to them. So have a great day, everyone, and check the description of the interview.